as I get up to try to run, two of the biggest guys I've ever seen in my life come into my room. This Samoan guy, his whole face is tattooed. This other big guy, I forgot his name, I think it was like Rick, this other huge white guy, and they were like, you're not going anywhere, you're coming with us. I still tried to get away, and I was on the ground, right? And they're like, put on flip-flops. I'm in my boxers, and they're like, they shove me in a car, and they drive me 6 hours up to Utah in the middle of the desert. So I didn't even know where I was for a month. I thought I was in like Payson or something, and I saw a license plate when I was sitting on a log. It was kind of like a wilderness program, but part wilderness at the beginning, and then you earn your rights to like go and stay in a dorm. And this guy was sitting next to me on the log, and he was laughing. He's like, we're in Utah. And I was like, what? Like, I didn't even know where I was. I didn't see my mom after she left, and they came in. And I saw on TV and movies that rehab was 30 days. So I was like, oh, well, you know, it's been about 20-something days. My mom should be coming to pick me up here pretty soon, right? And I asked that guy in the log, I was like, how long, like, my parents should be on the way, right? And he's like, and he laughed at me. And I was like, what's so funny? And it was like the worst news I ever heard at the time. He goes, no, if you do this program perfectly, you'll be here for 10 and a half months. 10 and a half months. Wow. So I'm like, I think I'm 15. I turned 16 while I was there. And I was a bad kid. I like to act out. So I failed a lot of weeks. And if you fail your week, you have to stay there extra week. So I was there for over a year.
They just keep adding time.
Yeah, exactly. And I did really good at the beginning. I was like, okay, I'm going to do really good, convince my parents that I'm good, so they pull me out early, right? So I was a mentor. I got all these privileges. And then one day I was like, they're not going to pull me out, so screw this, and I'm going to act out.
Sure.
So I started acting out, and then I really, really pissed off the owners and a lot of people, and I had to run a lot. They would run you till you passed out if, like, you acted out to get your energy out. And it was a really rough program, right? We ran them, like, they ran you every day, and you had to do chants, and like, I'm responsible for my own actions, and like, it was kind of like military school. I figure I've never been to military school, but it was kind of like a boot camp. And I just remember, you know, like being in there, I missed, you know, Christmas. I missed, because I went there in October. I missed my birthday in March, turning 16. I missed all of these huge things, like my family's birthdays, and it was like so depressing for me. Now, I bring up this story. I've been to tons of treatment centers. Like, this one's important because you think I'd start to think about my actions, right? Like, I got me there. No, I just hated my parents. They put me here. Right. And I had the choice at the time, and that's the thing about addiction is you always have a choice to get help, right? But because I was introduced to the 12 steps or Alcoholics Anonymous at 15. I've been to meetings before this point. And but the choice was, in my mind, is I'm going to go harder when I get out of here to piss my parents off, right? I was there for a year and 2 months maybe. I get out, and I stayed sober for a month because I started going to the house parties with the Chaparral kids, Desert Mountain kids, the Swirl kids. I started seeing them drinking and smoking, and for the first month, I was too cool. I was like, no, I don't do that. I'm too cool for this. But little did I know I'm already crossed that line, so I don't have a choice. Like, it's going to win eventually. And I remember I was at a party one night, I saw a beer, and I just snatched that, and it was off to the races. My parents thought I was doing good. I hit it really well for a while. And I convinced them to let me, since I'm doing so good, let me backtrack real quick. I didn't graduate high school because I was gone for that time. All my friends were already graduating. I would have been a junior again. So I got my GED while I was there. So I convinced my parents, hey, since I got my GED, I can go to college a year early. Let me go to Scottsdale Community College and then transfer to ASU. So in my mind...
You had a plan.
Yeah, I had a plan. My parents were like, that's great. He's changing his life. He wants to go to college and, like, you know, get a degree and, like, do well. I wanted to party. That's why I wanted to go to ASU. I knew a lot of people that were going there that I used to party with, and that was my plan. Right. And I was really good at manipulating. You know, I learned really well how to manipulate my parents, and they let me go, and they paid all this money for me to go. I think I made it 2 semesters maybe because I picked up a new habit. I was drinking like crazy, and I got introduced to cocaine when I was at ASU, and that really took me off the rails. I was spending all my parents' money they were sending for food. Right. Cocaine's very expensive, so I was doing it all the time, right, and drinking. And somehow I maintained good grades just to play the facade because I would cheat and I would just, you know, do all that and study for my tests. But then it caught up to me. I remember I didn't have alcohol one time. And I was such an alcoholic to this point that where when I stopped, I'd get DTs, I'd get the shakes, and I'd withdraw really hard if I went without it for like 12 hours. So I'm laying in my dorm for 2 weeks withdrawing. I couldn't get out of bed. So I missed it was finals week. Missed all my finals for that semester. So I had to drop out. And looking back, it was wild. I don't think my parents fully caught on to, they knew I was doing something wrong, but I don't think they knew how bad it was with the cocaine and stuff. I'm sure they thought I was drinking. So when I got out of college, I didn't really have anything going for me, right? I didn't really have many friends. I failed out of college, failed out of high school, got my GED, already been to a treatment center. And I still didn't think I had a problem. Like maybe subconsciously,
right,
but I didn't want to stop. So I was in and out of rehabs from that point. My parents were putting me in them because they knew I had a problem. And I was like, yeah, whatever. And I went to a ton of treatment centers. I don't know the number, but IOPs, detoxes, all of that. And then I was at this place called Crossroads, and I met this guy there. Now, any treatment center that you're in, there's going to be the people that want to get sober and mean it, and they put in the work.
right,
And then there's going to be the people that don't want to get sober.
Absolutely.
And if you stick with, it's just like any situation in life, school, work, who you hang around is who you become.
yes,
And I used to think that's not true. I can make my own choices regardless. But if I'm hanging around people doing drugs all the time and I like doing drugs, I'm probably going to do drugs. And so I started hanging out with the wrong crowd at this treatment center. I was sober maybe 2 months. I was actually sober, doing good, probably the longest time I've had since I was 11, besides being in Utah or whatever. And I didn't know why this guy was in treatment, but I knew that we both had overnights because we earned the right, because we had time sober. And we were both saying we're going to go home and do an overnight at our houses. But we're like, hey, we should meet up and go drink. So we went to a pool hall. They didn't card me. I was 20. And we drank a bunch of pitchers of beer. And this is what it looks like, right? My intentions when I went into it were, we can drink and not get too crazy. Like, let's have a pitcher, let's go bowling or play pool. And that's it, right? Pitcher after pitcher after pitcher. Then we do shots. And then next thing you know, we're going and buying pills, and we're doing those. So it's probably 3 a.m. I'm drunk. I'm on these pills. And this is when I find out why he was in there. And he's like, hey, I'm coming down, so we need to go get some drugs. And I was like, well, I've never done that before, so I'm not going to do it. You can get it. And he was a meth addict, so he's like, I'm going to go get some meth. And he was diabetic, so he had hundreds of needles, and he would inject his meth. And so I went with him to go get it, and my intention was fully not to do it.
Right.
But this is addiction, right? Especially when you're under the influence, you make choices that you normally wouldn't sober. Right. And not saying that weed's not the gateway drug, but alcohol, I made the worst decisions drunk.
Sure.
And did all the drugs that I got into when I was under the influence of alcohol.
Right.
And so he got the meth, and little did I know, he went into a gas station bathroom to do it, and I was with him, and he had loaded one for me, right? And I'm like, well, I guess I'm doing this. And he shot me up for the first time, not trying to get graphic, but it was weird because in that moment, it was like, dang, this was a party. This started as fun, right? I've been to all these treatment centers. I'm 20 years old. Now I have a needle in my arm.
Right.
And I'm living with him, working at this call center, shooting up like 8 times a day. That's all I do is meth, barely eating, barely sleeping, because he could sleep and eat. I couldn't. Meth keeps you up. So I was up for 5-7 days at a time. And I'm tall and skinny now. I'm 180 pounds, 6'2". I was like 120 pounds and 6'2". Like I was a skeleton. And since I couldn't sleep, I started losing my mind. Right. And he could sleep somehow. And I was working at this call center. I hadn't slept in probably 5-7 days. And I thought customers, it was like AT&T call center, right? And I thought customers were talking crap to me, like cussing me out. And I thought my coworkers were all like ganging together to say I was on drugs and all these things. It was all in my mind, little did I know, but I started cussing out a customer. And my manager took me off the phones, and I just remember I had been shooting up while I was at the work, and I wasn't wearing long sleeves, and there was like blood coming down my arm. They knew I was on drugs. And she's like, he's on drugs. And I heard whispering. And I was like, no, it's just my anxiety, trying to play it off or whatever. And I realized they're probably going to call the cops, so I should probably get out of there. So I left and just started walking around. It was like 16th Street in Camelback, right? Just walking around that area. And I was completely losing my mind. I saw like a billboard that, was like the face of meth, and it was me on it. Like I was hallucinating, seeing all these things. All my loved ones were driving by in cars yelling, "You're a drug addict." Like my mom, my sisters, and like that's not happening. Right. And I remember I went back to, I texted him and told him like, the world's ending, all this crazy stuff, people are after me. And he's like, oh my gosh, I got to go pick him up, right? Because he's going to get arrested. So he lived like 50 minutes away, so it took a long time. And he ended up picking me up. And I went back to his house, and I thought that if I went in there, like I was going to die. And it probably would have been true, if I kept doing what I was doing. So I ended up calling my parents, and they hadn't talked to me in a while, and they knew I was bad because I called my mom and told her that day that it was the end of the world and like we need to be together. And she was like, oh gosh, like what is he on? So they picked me up, and I remember I slept for 3 days straight.
Sure.
Ate a ton of food, and then they sent me to California for treatment, right? And all of these things, man, I look back and I'm like, dang, you think I would just figure it out.
Right.
But I almost died from alcohol in California. I met a cute girl at a job interview. It was more of like a sober living. And I was like, hey, let's go drink on the beach. And I killed like a whole handle of alcohol. And I woke up in somebody's backyard because apparently I hopped in their backyard and like hit my head really hard. And I woke up in the hospital. They didn't know who I was. And they discharged me, gave me a bus pass. And like somehow I got back to the sober living and convinced them that I like used mouthwash when they breathalyzed me. And they believed me. I don't know why they would. And then I called my mom and I was like, I need to come home, right? She didn't know anything about it because the rehab didn't catch on. And I came home, and this is nearing towards the end of my story, right? Where my parents like caught on, they kicked me out. I was couch surfing, I was homeless, like I didn't really have any friends, but I always was able to manipulate certain people.
Right.
And I would meet certain people, and they wouldn't know how bad I was. So I could live a little bit with them until they realized, I destroy everything. So I convinced this girl who lived in Old Town Scottsdale to sleep on her floor, right? And they did drugs, so I gave them drugs. If they let me sleep on the floor, it was kind of like my payment. And we would go to Old Town Scottsdale bars all the time and get drunk, do drugs. And I just remember they all somehow held a job, but full transparency, the only job I was ever able to hold until I was 21 was Wendy's for like maybe 6 months when I was 18 because of drugs. I was doing cocaine, drinking, I'd get fired. And so I'm sitting in this apartment, and it's not a great apartment because we're all doing bad things, and they somehow could hold a job at CVS. So they all worked like the same shift, and nobody was there, and it was probably 7 p.m. And I was sitting there, and I had like a handle of vodka and drugs. I started sobbing. I started breaking down because I was like, this, like I said, this was a party, this was fun, and now I have nothing. Like I have nothing.
It's not fun anymore.
And it wasn't for a long time, but I really started to realize that, right? And I started sobbing. I started yelling at the wall and yelling like, hey, if anything's out there, like help me now or I'm going to kill myself, right? Like I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And the roof didn't lift off the apartment. God didn't come down and scoop me up, say, I got you, Taylor. The door didn't get kicked in. Like nothing intervened. So I just chugged a bunch of vodka, took a bunch of pills, and I was like hoping not to wake up the next day. Because I used to pray to just like get hit by cars because that's how much I didn't want to live. Because I couldn't stop doing it. I couldn't imagine being without it. But I think I was at that jumping off point that night. Like I can't imagine being without it. But I can't imagine living this way any longer because I'm not going to live long. So the craziest thing happened, though, is I woke up clearly. I'm alive. And I had I didn't have any more of my alcohol, but there was a Jack Daniels bottle in the freezer, and it wasn't mine. Now, this is crazy because I want to explain this to you. I would steal anything from anybody. Sure. I don't care if it's yours. If I need it, I'm going to get it. And when I woke up, I had no craving to get high or to get drunk for the first time in 10 years. Now, that bottle, the thought that I had about that bottle, I knew it was there and I had some drugs left. I was like, that's somebody else's. I can't drink it. That is not me. I don't care.
Especially at that point in time.
Yeah, I don't care at all. So I knew I had a short time frame, right? I had maybe 20 minutes, maybe even less, or I'm going to do drugs and alcohol because that's what I do. And I still had it, right, even though it wasn't mine. The only thing that I had in my possession was my phone. Now, the reason I didn't have money to pay for the phone, but my mom paid for it to check to see if I was alive every couple of months, right? Like, it was a sad reason. Like, they were preparing for my funeral for a long time. And I called my mom because I was like, I need to make the choice now since I don't have the craving. So people say reaching out for help is a weakness, and I really want to express that it's not, right? It's like the strongest thing that you can do. So this phone felt like I was lifting up this whole table that we're sitting at. But I called, and she was out of the state, so she's like, I can't help you right now, but call your aunt. Maybe she could send someone. Because if I withdraw off of alcohol, I can die from seizures, and I've had one before. So she sent my little cousin, who always looked up to me, and I was still that 120 pounds sunken in. And she pulls up, and she starts sobbing when she saw me. And I didn't look in the mirror. I was already well past, it didn't even feel like I was alive anymore.
Right.
And I start sobbing, and she took me to the hospital, and then they put me in St. Luke's detox, and I detoxed for a week. That was June 18th, 2015, which is my sobriety date. And, every time I went into treatment, I pick and chose what I wanted to do, and it never worked out. So I was sitting in there, and two people came in and spoke. One guy used to be was a heroin addict, and he had been sober for like 4 years. And then this lady was a cocaine addict, and she had been sober for a while. Now, I don't remember a dang word of what they said, but you know the term, your life flashing before your eyes? Mm-hmm. I, like when you're dying, but I wasn't dying, but it was the weirdest thing. I hallucinated, but imagined my entire life from when I first smoked weed with that 18-year-old. Every bad choice I made. It was the worst movie I've ever watched. Every bad choice I made until that moment up in St. Luke's. And it finally hit me that I have to do everything in my power and my will to not go back to that.
Right.
And I need to listen to other people because I got myself there. So it was kind of my awakening moment. And I still fought, don't get me wrong. I went to Calvary after that for 21 days till my insurance kicked me out. And I remember sitting in group with the therapist, and the therapist is like, hey, Taylor, once you graduate here, you should do PHP and IOP, which is classes, right, afterwards to keep you on that continuum of aftercare. And at first I was like, no, I don't want to do it. And then this voice came into my head, and it said, you probably should do something different this time. So every time I fought it, but I did it. I did the PHP for, however long it was, and graduated. I did the IOP for the 6 to 12 weeks. Then I went to sober living, right? And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to go home.
Right.
And I went to sober living for, 3 to 6 months. And what I did differently is I started all the new guys that came in. I maybe had 1 month, 2 months sober, but I started helping them because they had 2 days. Because I was always told from my sponsor, because I got a sponsor, I started working the steps. And I was always told, if they have a day less than you, you can help them. So I was sponsoring or helping all these guys in the house.
Right.
And I only have 2 months. But I'm listening to all these other people and giving back and trying to help. And really ever since then, I haven't done sobriety perfectly, don't get me wrong. But I've been sober for 7 years, and it'll be 8 years in June. And really, I've just taken those simple things that I was taught to stay sober. I help other people. I call people and talk about my problems. You know what I mean? I do therapy. I have a psychiatrist because unfortunately, and you brought this up at the beginning, starting drugs so young when your brain's developing, I have permanent damage to my brain. So call it the neurotransmitters, the chemicals or whatever, I need to take medication because if I don't, I'm below everybody. I'm depressed. And I did that,
Sure.
And I wish, and people try to tell me that, but I didn't listen, and I have to suffer the consequences. But truly, I think God saved my life in that moment, and that's my personal belief. And I have a beautiful life today because I listen to these other people, and I've stayed sober. Because if I drink, if I use, I ruin my whole life. You know, I have a wife, I have a kid,
Right.
and I have so much to lose today. Not saying I can't go back out. It's a disease. I have to continue the daily things to do that.
Right.
But don't get me wrong, I'm still insecure. I still have that out-of-place feeling. I still get in my head all the time. But what I recognize is a lot of those things are lies today, right? It's all just in my head, and that's why I have to talk about it and get real about it.
Right.
And sharing my story is one of them. Like coming on here and sharing my story, it reminds me that I'm not bulletproof, you know, because I have a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
It's a daily thing, you know, recovery. And mental health struggles, that's a daily thing, if not every 20 minutes, you know?
Absolutely.
And so, I mean, that's really the gist of my story. Obviously, there's a lot more details in between then. You know, I dealt with the law, got arrested a couple of times. Thankfully, I only did overnights, and I never got a felony, so that hasn't, thankfully,
Right.
messed with my job and all that. And now I work at a recovery center
Right.
and promote treatment and get out in the community and promote treatment to other people. And on my free time, I'm helping people get sober. And that's truly what keeps me sober and keeps me happy. And I think that's my calling in life from God. And it's a beautiful thing, you know. I never thought my disturbing, toxic, awful decisions.
Your very addictive personality.
Yeah. I never thought that
Yeah.
that would become a positive in a sense.
Johnny G with Out as the New In podcast. Please make sure to come back next week and listen to the conclusion of Taylor Garrey's story.